And now to the UK, where officials are dealing with a recent surge of knife crime.
That first time I got stabbed 9 times, and then the second time I got stabbed 9 times.
There were 14,000 knife-related incidents in London.
As of lately, the UK has become synonymous with this image of rising knife crime.
Little knives, knives, knives.
We see these police pictures of some of the weapons they seize. It's like a Counter-Strike loot box. Today I want to peek past the headlines and talk about how bad is this problem really? And are the politicians and pundits that like to talk about this a lot,
Lawless Britain is in full swing.
are they helping or are they making the problem worse? Today we're going to explore the UK's knife crime epidemic.
It's not just a black issue. It's not just a London issue. It's a nationwide issue, and it's growing.
Right, I'm just going to lay my cards out here. I get a little bit annoyed about how London and the UK is framed. The media make it out as though if you want to go to a Greg's Baker, you have to have a jewel to get in.
The wholesale carrying of weapons that can kill another human being reached an appalling level. And I'm interested to know, do you feel safe?
There was a single month in 2017 where London had a higher murder rate than New York City. I'm like, yeah, that sounds pretty bad. Fox News reported on this. They said, London murder rate beats New York for month as stabbing surge. I just want to bring the temperature down a little bit. So in this month that they're talking about, London had 22 murders as opposed to New York's 21. And this was being portrayed as though fucking samurais had overtaken London. But it was a massive example of misrepresenting a problem. The real story here was that New York had actually done a fantastic job at reducing homicides. If we look at how bad it was and then where it ended up, this is a brilliant story. This is like a good news story. But instead of Fox going, hey look, well done New York, you guys are doing great, we're nearly as low as Europe, instead they reported it like London had surged in knife crime, when in reality knife crimes had stayed the same.
Recently read a story that in London, which has unbelievably tough gun laws, they say it's as bad as a military war zone.
And this story pisses me off because New York obviously returned to overtaking London. And if we just compare London and England to, I don't know, America, that has a city called St. Louis where its murder rate is 60.9 per 100,000 people. And London's worst year ever was 1.7 per 100,000 people. Now that isn't to say that the UK doesn't have a knife crime problem. Is it this absolute war zone? No, but we do have a problem, and we have to ask, where did this knife crime come from?
Every 14 minutes, there's a knife crime across England and Wales.
It's happening so often to the point where people are fearing for their lives every single day.
So let's do the thing that we do where we go back in time, right? Let's go back to pre-war Britain and try and get an understanding of what murder was like in this period of time. Oh, murder. The data on murder from this period of time is a little bit sketchy. Did every single murdered prostitute from the slums get recorded? You know, PC Plod just with his little notebook, it's getting a bit full. Is it worth the paperwork? Who knows? Probably not. However, with, you know, a massive fucking handful of salt, we do have some statistics. The government has data on 1901 to 2018 and the homicide rate. And it appears that murder was in fact lower than it was in the 90s to 2000s. And you might be wondering, what the fuck? The slums of London, with the piss and the poo, there was less murder. Why is that? You may be wondering. Well, don't worry, I will tell you.
The public feel crime is increasing and the police are doing nothing about it. The police feel the public couldn't care less.
The most interesting period of time to look at is the 60s. From the 60s, we noticed that the murder rate just starts growing and growing and growing. Now, we don't have any data specifically on knife crimes. They didn't record it. It was just a murder's a murder. But we can assume from our knowledge about gangs in the past that, yeah, probably a few pokies were used. But what's also interesting is if we look at the gender divide. In this same sort of period, we see this dramatic split where men aged 15 to 44 started just fucking dropping like flies. So it is important for us to ask the question, what was happening in the 60s and why were men starting to just be killed more?
Swinging London, changing London, down with the old, up with the new.
Post-World War II, the UK was rebuilding. And in this time, our culture massively changed. We would start to embrace a new type of individualism and consumerism. Largely thanks to the Americans and the advent of home TV, we could now sit at home and have adverts blasted into our retinas. Oh yeah, we do need a new sofa. What's that? A hat you can drink beer from? And like, look, I'm taking the piss, but this was a good period of time. In a way, Mickey and Barry and Bill and Stevie, the average bloke and his family, obviously, their living standards were growing at an incredible rate. However, with all this prosperity, there would be a consequence. Boys, I want to take a second here. About a month ago, I was on holiday in Croatia and I thought I lost my wallet. But luckily, thanks to today's sponsor, Extra and the Card Holder Pro, because of this little bad boy right here, which is the Finder card. This is matched up to my iPhone. Like this. And then we find it. And I was able to find my wallet and it was next to me. It was in the car, but I really did think I left it up a mountain. Very nice looking. It's made of 100% recycled aluminium with no plastic. On top of that, you get to do this cool thing where there's a button and it lets you push your cards out. It holds between 1 to 14 cards. And also you can kind of customize these wallets to fit what you kind of like. So here I've got a cash clip. I don't really use coins a lot, but you can also get a coin holder. And I chose midnight blue and I've also got this strap around it. It feels like you're customizing a gun in Call of Duty or something. As well with the Card Holder Pro, it's RFID protected. It will protect against wireless theft. And there's a bunch of discounts you can get. So you can use my code GIANT to get a discount. But right now you can get 40% off in the flash sale, which is running between September 18th and September 29th. So really make sure you use that because you'll get 40% off. And you can use it on top of my code GIANT. So be sure to check the links below. Anyway, back to the video.
We collected data on problems with social gradients, the kind of problems that are more common at the bottom of the social ladder. And there you see it in relation to the measure of inequality I've just shown you. The more unequal countries doing worse on all these kinds of social problems.
Generally speaking, it is understood that when inequality grows in society, the higher that crime and in turn murder, knife crimes, the higher that will be. And generally speaking, this is true. But we need to take that with a bit of context. Oh look. Bit of context for you. This chart here is really interesting. It shows us how inequality changed post-war. And you might be looking at this and going, hang on a fucking second, Jimmy. You told me that when inequality is bigger, crime is bigger. But I'm seeing that the 60s and 70s, this is a time of low inequality. But what the fuck, man? Look at the crime. Now this right here is where culture plays its role.
Rock and roll is dead! Rock and roll isn't dead! Rock and roll isn't dead! Rock and roll isn't dead!
So in this post-war period, there's a few things that are happening also. So you're having the rise of youth culture and subcultures. As laws have changed, etc., young people had more free time and they were no longer instantly destined for the mines. Slowly, our values were changing to mean if you're rich, you're cool. This is the same period of time where there's a rising celebrity culture. The films, the TV, advertisements would reinforce this idea that in order to mean something to society, you needed stuff. You know, you need the nice clothes, you need a nice car, the shiny smile with a hot wife. But hang on a second, what if you had no stuff? You know, and what if you grew up in an area, like a kind of poorer area, where people around you didn't really have stuff? But your TV is telling you, you need stuff. Well, my friends, I have a solution. Sell drugs.
Poverty isn't a thing that you're either in or not in. The individual people are sometimes above and sometimes below, constantly verging on poverty.
In this period of time, we were creating an underclass, a class of people that were left behind, growing up poorer in more deprived conditions. And when they looked around for role models, it would be people generally growing up in a similar situation in the same environment. And the bloke with the nice trainers, the car, the watch, the girls, and most importantly, respect, that was often the drug dealer. You see, as the United Kingdom was becoming more and more capitalist and more consumerist, obviously more industries were starting to pop up and develop. And a growing industry emerged around the illegal drug market, where you didn't need some degree or wear a dumb shirt and call people Mr. and Mrs.
Okay, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Corporate Erin. I'm the manager for the managerial logistics for Management McManagement.
But it was a place that if you wanted to take the risk, you could make a lot of money very quickly, just like society keeps telling you you need to do. And with that, from the 60s to the 90s, the murder rate and in turn the knife crime rate would just keep going up. Chiefs, it really, just doesn't stop, does it? Fucking hell. It finally peaks in the UK in 2003 and then starts to decline. This same rise, if we track some different analytics, seems to follow trends of growing inequality, growing divorce rates, growing drug prosecutions, growing alcohol consumption, and growing child poverty. So this is really helpful for us because it really paints a picture of how these changing economic situations and changing cultural values increase both crime and murder. And amongst all of this growing murder, there would be knife crime. In 2023, Elaine Williams published this paper called Policing the Crisis in the 21st Century, The Making of Knife Crime Youths in Britain. I'll link that below. It's a really good read. Check it out. And it explains to us something very interesting, that the term knife crime really started to mainly appear for the first time in the early 2000s. And it was like portraying this brand new scary phenomena in England. But this term, knife crime, was an unofficial label. I know that sounds weird, but just think about it for a second. What is knife crime? Is it a killing, or is it a crime where a knife is present and maybe used to threaten someone? Or what if there was no active crime, but a knife was found in someone's car? These are all technically knife crimes. And then I'm gonna get Jordan Peterson here. What do you mean knife? Like, are we talking Counter-Strike knives, or are we talking, I don't know, a screwdriver? Is a screwdriver a knife? Is a piece of glass, like from a bottle, a sharp object, is that a knife? Are we talking about gangsters in a street carrying knives? Are we talking about drunk husbands threatening their wife? These things I have said are all very different situations and circumstances, and they all have very different motives. The police, until 2001, never used the term knife crime. The media did. 2001 would be the introduction of knife-enabled crime. This would be a tick box that police officers would check when a knife was involved. This definition included all sharp objects. So we're talking screwdrivers and broken bottles, glass. And this recording made no distinction between the motive of the crime. Whether it was a domestic abuse, whether it was a bar brawl, whether it was theft, whether it was SA. It didn't record the age or the ethnicity of the offender. The study claims that throughout what the media are labeling a knife crime epidemic, knife usage as a percentage of all violent crime consistently remained between 5% and 8% of all offences. And why that's important is because it is very hard to say whether the use of a knife was any more or less common proportionately to all the homicides that have happened historically. But that, my friends, that doesn't sell as many newspapers as knife crime youths are on the rise.
Yeah, okay, how many teenagers? 16 this year alone in one city.
Needs to happen?
How many before you get serious?
On the 4th of November 2003, a 14-year-old lad by the name of Luke Walmsley was stabbed and killed in a rural school in Lincolnshire. This case sparked the conversation around knife crime as this kind of distinctly new concern for England and Wales. You'd have newspapers saying stuff like, there are an incredible number of youngsters who are willing to sign up to the knife culture and bring an offensive weapon into school. From here, newspapers started to report more and more about different knife crimes that involved young people. And this was painting a perception of this growing phenomena of knife crime amongst youth. And you can see this whole youth slant in this campaign here from 2005. It's called It's Not a Game. It's a great example of how they were trying to say that it was young people playing video games and it was making us all violent and just stabbing each other. And if we look very closely here, let's look at the skin color. Feel weird saying that, but you know, just bear with me. I'm looking at this and I'm seeing a lot of white boys. This is really important to note. This is 2005, right? At this point, the perception, the rhetoric around knife crime, it was being labeled as a general youth problem. Not white, not black, but a youth problem. However, very slowly and subtly, this youth problem became more and more portrayed as an inner city black problem.
The black community need to be mobilised in denunciation of this gang culture, but we won't stop this by pretending that it isn't young black kids doing it.
Tom Rees Price. Tom was a rich white lawyer killed in North London by two black men. This case became an obsession of the media. They would not stop reporting about this case. The newspapers would explain that he was smartly dressed, that he was a high-flying individual, a city lawyer. The coverage of this case in the media was so disproportionate that it led to the new police commissioner by the name of Ian Blair. He accused the media of institutionalized racism. His argument being that on the same day, several other people who were not white but were from different ethnic backgrounds were murdered on the same day, and all they got was one paragraph on page 97. By the end of 2006, discussion in the public sphere increased around knife crime in relation to black communities. And I think there is a reason for this.
I remember 30 years ago, there was quite a number of squats here, broken down houses. Now these houses probably go for something like £400,000, I would have thought.
In the mid to late 2000s, London had seen increased gentrification. This is like, you know, fucking middle class Michael and his family have moved into London. But with that, we were now starting to see that the middle class was living in closer physical proximity to more deprived neighborhoods. The same paper references a man by the name of Gilligan. He said that violent confrontations were not more likely, only more likely to involve the middle classes, and therefore more likely to be reported. The increased visibility of this crime would create a perception that this is a growing crime. We're seeing it more and more, and these videos and, you know, very selective reporting might have been skewing the perception of who was doing these crimes.
So you're going to be getting searched now for any weapons or okay, namely knives.
At least you just come back from a strip search. Why are you not doing this,
you're
bro?
detained for a Section 1
For
place
what
search.
reason?
My name is PC Harris.
Bro, you ran past me. Why would that?
Okay.
We often see across the media and social media, etc., a hyper-focus on London. Your drunk bald uncle might share on his Facebook a thing like this. 2/3 of knife offenders under 25 were black or minority ethnic. So with that statistic specifically, it is true that 2/3 of the people in London who were found possessing a knife, they were black or minority ethnic. However, when we understand that 46% of Londoners are black or minority ethnic, it starts to make a little bit more sense, because we might also understand that black and minority ethnic people are more likely to be from more deprived neighborhoods in London. And knowing that London is central to UK drug trafficking, gang culture, and has a very high population density. And also, let's just bloody remember that we're talking about possession. The viral Facebook post will say knife offences to make you think we're talking about stabbings. But we're talking about possession, where black and minority ethnic groups are 4.1 times more likely to be stopped and searched than white people. And thus, if you're searching black and minority ethnic groups 4 times more than white people, yeah, you might find more knives on them. But just, you know, to tie this whole thought together, the vast majority of knife crime offences in the UK are done by white people. However, this isn't the convenient mental image that the media tends to portray when we say the phrase knife crime used.
We have a major problem with black gangs. Rival black gangs are killing each other.
But we begin today in the United Kingdom, where a new highly critical report looking into knife crime has found the government's response completely inadequate.
2000s onwards, everyone's scared their little billies are going to get stabbed going to the shops. And so a general pressure grew on the police and politicians to do something. And we started to hear, particularly in England, a more tough on crime type of rhetoric.
If you're carrying 10, if you're using 20, and if you do end up killing someone, it's life behind the door. Without parole, you'll take your final breath in jail.
And we would see the controversial use of Section 60 searches. It's like stop and search. This means that a copper can just point at anyone for no reason and say, hey, yo, fam, run me your pockets, yeah? And so the increased attention and more proactive police response can, of course, make it seem like it's a growing phenomenon. But, you know, we're balanced people. We're balanced people here. So we have to ask the question, are knives being used more in proportion, or are we just now more aware of this thing and better at reporting and recording it? And this is a much harder question to answer. We can try and work it out by looking at like homicide statistics, stats for overall knife offences and possession. But the best one really to look at is hospital admissions for knife wounds. You know, it's harder to fudge those numbers. You either have a hole in your body from a knife or you don't. This graph shows us that a general trend of knife crime happened to peak at 2004 to 2005. But then there's a dip all the way down to 2014 and we hit a low point, which is weird phrasing because morally it's a high point, but you know, You get what I'm saying? Knife crime and homicide in general reached a record low around this period. And some people started to think that the knife crisis was over. And then it just went, nope. This graph cuts out, but recent data will show that it seemed to have peaked in 2019 and then dropped, obviously due to COVID, and then has grown recently, but is still under the peak of 2019. So it just seems, if we're to compare it to general homicide stats, it seems that the percentage that knives were specifically used seems to keep relatively constant and kind of just mirroring the rough peaks of general homicide in the country.
No investments for the young people. Community centres being closed down. No emotional support for our young people.
So if we look at this chart, it shows us the causes of knife crime. And if we were to add up street violence, fights, gang attacks, it kind of comes to about 38% of all knife crimes. So with all that in mind, it's a perfect time for us to ask the next question. Why do people stab each other? So I'm going to present a few of the theories that people have around knife crime and crime in general. Now, for instance, a lot of pundits love to talk about multiculturalism and how that is what causes all crime on earth ever. And they do this because of the correlation between the rise of immigration and the rise of crime, murder and knife crime, etc. But that's only like sort of true. It's like, you know, a quarter of the story. In the year 2022, when we had our peak of immigration, where we had 745,000 immigrants into the country, our murder rate in the country was 11.5. Knife hospital admissions were 3,775. But then we have a little problem, because if we go back to 2006 and 7, where we have 322,000, so, you know, under half of the immigrants coming into the country, our murder rate was at 14.1. And knife admissions to hospital were 5,720. So if it was simply a case that immigration multiculturalism means more murders, well, it should map on pretty much perfectly to the statistics, and it doesn't. So then we have to go into the claim that it's something to do with sort of the lack of religion and breakdown of cultural values, as well as not being as harsh on punishment. So, you know, you can point at somewhere like the UAE, very strict, very religious, very harsh punishments, and they have a very low murder rate. But then, my friends, what about Mexico? It's just South America in general. You try to tell me they're not very, very religious and they don't have very strict laws? Of course that's insane, but they have the highest murder rate on earth. And even people like myself that would more often point to inequality and that how worsening inequality generally maps onto crime and homicide, even that perspective isn't perfect. Qatar is very unequal but has very low crime and murder. This is a very highly religious country and very strict on punishment. So that might tilt your scale towards thinking it's all about religion and strict laws, but then what about Norway? Norway is very equal. It's very equal society. Relatively, they are less religious, or at least they're less strict about religion. They are famously very soft on punishment when it comes to crime. However, they too are low crime and low murder. So from all that, we can conclude, I don't know, what can we this fucking confusing? Don't worry, my friends, we can work this out.
I grew up in poverty. You know, I was always looking for a way of providing for myself, or sourcing an income, or sourcing some sort of money to maintain a certain status amongst my friends.
So from what I could figure out from all this research, and it is confusing, I ain't gonna lie, is that from what I can tell, it seems to be a mix between cultural social values, inequality, and a trust in your country's institutions and social order.
My friend is dead, yeah, and this is what we're doing to support him, yeah, and look what they're doing, look.
However, when you're scrolling through Twitter and every pundit is trying to say that it's a cultural issue, it's culture, and they kind of imply that it's purely a problem of morality, it completely ignores the responsibility of capitalism and inequality of creating that culture in the first place. In the 80s, we saw a massive rise in unemployment and inequality. And as you'd expect in this Thatcher era, we would see a massive rise in crime and murder rates. It's like, you know, if you're putting this mad pressure on everyone they need to be wealthy to matter, specifically young men who, you know, biologically and socially are probably more conditioned towards violence and taking risks, they're going to look around at their life and see, God, I'm never going to get a fucking job in an office. And so some will make a decision to take a shortcut to try and make money. Some of those young men, not all, will be looking around and seeing who is the high status person in my community. And if that person is the drug dealer and he's carrying a knife, you might be inspired to do the same thing. And so this creates just a vicious spiral that's really hard to undo.
Why do you carry a 15-inch knife?
Because it's big.
and it'll get them scared.
And so look, I know this is pretty depressing, but come on, there must be, please God, there must be some solution. There must be a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Well, my friends, we have to head over to Glasgow. I'm sorry, it weren't good, I know.
If you step out into the housing estates, there's a trend of binge drinking, knife carrying, a willingness to use that knife.
In 2005, Scottish people were 3 times more likely to be murdered than in England and Wales. But somehow Glasgow massively reduced knife crime by doing something just unthinkable, which was solving the root causes. They took a different attitude. They wanted to treat knife crime as a health problem as opposed to just a purely criminal one. And so in Scotland, they took a mixed approach, right? So they did make the sentences and the punishments harsher. The average sentence for carrying a knife tripled. But whilst doing that, they combined it by focusing on like high-risk youth, kids from certain areas that are just statistically more likely to end up carrying a knife. And they would work very closely and very voluntarily with them. They wouldn't force them to do anything. They would give them lots of guidance. They would talk to them about the risks of their lifestyle, as well with helping them with housing, relocation, job opportunities, employment training, and just having close communication with them. If they had a problem, they could speak to these people. But it's very interesting to look at Glasgow in the case of multiculturalism. As Glasgow got more racially diverse, more multiculturalism, knife crime came down. And now look, Glasgow hasn't completely solved knife crime. They still have some, but it is far down from where it was. And especially if we compare their response to England and Wales and where we're at versus them, yeah, we fucked up.
Tyson Fury has called on the government to introduce tougher punishments for knife crime, comparing it to a pandemic. He said, "This is becoming ridiculous. Idiots carry knives. This needs to stop."
In England, what you hear an awful lot is talking about punishment. More stop and search, stricter laws, put them in jail for longer. However, all of that, while sounding very logical, that means more prison time, more policing, more legal costs, all of which means much more money.
Think about this. 1 million for a murder trial, okay, to put one guy away. If we had that million, how many young lives could we save?
If we look at the YEF toolkit, which sort of analyses all the different ways you can deal with crime, how much it costs and how effective it is, the approaches that work the best seem to cost the most. This pisses me off about England, but I really think that is the main issue. It just costs a lot. And there's this like cultural bottleneck around accepting that law and order, like worse punishments, etc., is pretty much pointless unless you combine it with targeted assistance of individuals who are high risk and likely to end up being involved in knife crime. If you don't improve those people's living standard and help them integrate into mainstream society, any law and order approach is just futile.
Let's remember, we've got a couple of centuries of this type of violent youth crime in predominantly white communities in Britain. What has led to reductions and solutions? At the turn of the 20th century in Manchester, it was intervention by church groups, it was intervention by community groups, it was ameliorative approaches essentially. In Glasgow, the same thing has occurred recently in the last few years, yet we're being suggested the exact opposite policies in London.
However, look, it's not all bad news. Slowly, we have started to come to our senses, and we are slowly starting to adopt that Glasgow model. Labour have this Young Futures programme. Combining that with increases in punishment, making it harsher if you do get caught with a knife, this would be a step in the right direction. But as I say, it's going to cost a lot of money and continuous money. You can't just stop. It doesn't just, you have to continuously fund these things. So Britain can fix its knife crime problem. It can do it, but it will take a lot of political will. And it seems for some reason in this country, we have just accepted that knife crime is just the price of doing business.
How real is it that something like that could happen to you?
Real, but it's the life that we live, isn't it?